I will be focusing mostly on the two CFGB projects in which MCC implemented. One is in Lebanon, which I was mostly associated with, writing a lot of the reports and different things surrounding it, and I also know a lot about the Syrian project in which we implemented. So Canadian Food Games Bank has about $12 to $13 million that have gone into food distribution, food aid programs within Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. So this is the team, the MCC team, in which I worked with. Doug and Naomi Enns are a couple who originally are from Winnipeg, and they spent 3 years in Chad with MCC, and then were back for 1 year, and then took another 3-year term in Beirut, Lebanon. Next to them is Maggie Gobble. She spent actually 4 years in Egypt, came back, did a master's in public health, and actually came to do a year to help with some of the office work. So she got there about a month before I left, and there was actually another Salter who took my position. So what I went to MCC with is called Service and Learning Together. There's about 35 to 40 of us all around the world. Last year, actually every year there's around 35 to 40, 45, in that range. And I was placed in Beirut, Lebanon, looking at the Syrian crisis and the Syrian refugee response. So it's basically just a program that from about 18 to 27, it's basically a year internship is the best way to describe it. So this is, I like to point out this is who I lived with. I lived in actually a Protestant seminary there that was called the Near East School of Theology, and that actually was born out of Presbyterian and Lutheran missionaries, so has a Presbyterian connection. So a lot of these are Middle Eastern pastors being trained to work within the Presbyterian Church within Syria and Lebanon. So there's a Palestinian, there's a couple of Germans who got there to study, there's a Nigerian up front, and then Lebanese and Syrians. And I learned a lot from many of these people concerning both the Syrian crisis but life in general. So just to kind of get your background on what MCC was doing in there, I won't focus this presentation on MCC, but I think it's just helpful to know what MCC was doing and kind of how the food project interacted within that. So within last fiscal year, there was about $8.4 million that went through our office, but a lot of that money was Canadian Food Games Bank. I think around $4 million of that were within the two projects. Both the projects were about $1.3 million, give or take, and they were 6-month projects. So over the course of the year, we implemented both over 6 months. I think our Syrian projects is its 4th renewal, so it's going into 2 years, and our Lebanese project is in its 3rd renewal, 6-month renewal. So this is...
Sorry? Not talking about the education. What's the education?
The education, that's just basically supporting, not CFGB funding, but NCC funding. It's basically doing kindergarten all the way up to university education. It's providing money, basically, in order for schools to keep running, both in Syria, but also paying for Syrian refugees within Lebanon.
To give us an example of what peace education is?
Peace education. I sure can. We have different programs, such as one I was involved in was called Restorative Justice. There was these 2 South African leaders that were brought in by one of our partners to work with Syrian youth and Syrian young people. They're a little older, to envision what does Syria look like after the conflict would end. So these people were looking at kind of the South African model and how they, after apartheid, how they move forward as a nation, both blacks and whites, but within Syria it will be Sunnis and Shiites and Alawites. So they were kind of envisioning a post-conflict Syria and what that will look like.
When you say they, what size of a group would you be looking at?
That group, the organization is a collective of activists up to 2,000, but they took some of their leadership, so there was probably, within that setting, there was about 25, but they're envisioning running a lot of these workshops. That was just kind of the first. And they have some also trauma and healing, which is also run under peace, which we can totally talk about. Catch me after, I can talk about it longer, but I kind of want to focus on the food project for that. So this is Syria, and I'll talk a bit of background in Syria. I think it's important to understand what it's like, what the conflict is like, and how that affects how we implement the projects and the food projects. Because I think every situation is differently, and as the CFGB employees continue to tell us, we're learning how to do this. We're learning what it means to incorporate food aid within a conflict zone, because it's a lot different than a development project. So just to show you kind of where we were working, in Lebanon, we were working, our Lebanese project was in Beirut, Saida, and Tyre, 3 main cities. And in Syria, we were working right around this area, which is called the Kalamoon Valley, and that's where our food aid project was done. So when I kind of talk about these areas, that's kind of envisioning. The Syrian is the Kalamoon Valley, right along the Lebanese border, and in Lebanon, it's Beirut, Sidon, and Sour or Tyre, depending on what language you're using. So just kind of give you an idea of what is occurring in Syria. If anyone tells you they know what's happening, they're lying to you. So this map has changed slightly. It's a little dated, but I think it shows you the complexity of what is occurring. The red of what you see there is the Assad regime, or the government of Syria and what they control. They actually control a little more. That green part has shrunk a little bit, but that is what the Assad regime controls. The green is called the opposition. Those are made up of some fundamentalist Islam groups, but also the moderate revolution, as we call it within a North American perspective. So they have a little bit of control of some areas. The blue or the black, depending on how you see it, is ISIS, or the Islamic State. They've had a kind of stronghold in northern Syria for about 2 years now. So that we've just learning about it within Lebanon and Syria. We've known about it for a long, long time. So they're actually controlling a little more of that area. And then the yellow is the Kurdish controlled areas, which is Kurdish is a people group that have never had their own peace, or I shouldn't say have never, but since the Middle East was carved off after World War I, never really have had their own state. So they kind of controlled northern Iraq, and now they're starting to control northeast Syria and different parts. So just to kind of get you the complexity, it's not two sides fighting, it's multiple sides fighting against each other. And that makes to implement a food project very, very difficult, because you have different partners who are on different sides of the issue, because there's not even two issues, there's 5, 6 issues. Just to kind of show you the demonstration of the amount of destruction that is going on in these cities. This is from Aleppo, which CFGB does have a project through the Catholic organization into Aleppo and into the opposition-controlled side. So this is just to show you some of the areas in which CFGB is able to get funding into, and just to demonstrate some of the destruction that is occurring. So this is the old souk in Aleppo, which was a beautiful city before the war, and it's been the hardest hit city. This was a world-class hospital within Aleppo. This is in Dara, where the kind of revolution began, and just to kind of demonstrate the amount of just historical sites being lost. People talk about the death toll, but they also talk about it. Syria is very proud of their history, and as they should be. It's a very, very old country, but a lot of it is being destroyed and will never be able to be rebuilt. And this is the middle of Aleppo. So this is just a demonstration. I should have put in some pictures of Homs, which is the third biggest city, and to me it reminds me of Stalingrad as I see photos of there, of just complete and utter destruction. So this is Lebanon. This is where I lived. I lived in Beirut. I never could go into Syria. It was a little too dangerous, and MCC wouldn't let me. Probably my father would appreciate that. But it's a lot smaller in Syria, as you see, but they're hosting about 1.3 million refugees at this time. And it is a country of about 4 to 5 million people. So as you see, it's about 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 persons in Lebanon right now is a Syrian refugee. And it gets even more complex because Syria actually kind of controlled Lebanon until 2006. Lebanon struggled with their own civil war from 1975 to 1990. And it was actually the Syrian president that helped stabilize the country. So half of Lebanon likes the Syrian president, half of them don't. So it's complex that in 2006 Syria was kicked out, but now there's 1.3 Syrians. There's tension there. And I like this picture because I think it demonstrates, I think people forget in the Middle East, Christians and Muslims have lived together for generations, and they do get along, and the majority do get along. This is the center of Beirut, where actually it used to be the Green Line, in which Lebanese civil war was fought. But now, as you see, there's an old Maronite church and a Sunni Muslim mosque, so they can live together. But I also like this picture because it demonstrates some of the tension between not just Christian and Muslim, but the different sects within Syria and Lebanon. There is still tension because, as you see, the mosque was built after the church. It was built in about 2006, and The Christians got a little uncomfortable with the mosque being a little higher than them, so if you see this bell being built, they're getting a little higher now. So as you see, I like this picture because it demonstrates that they can live together, yes, but there still is tension. I also like to show what is Lebanon and Syria. This is a picture of Aleppo. It was a beautiful, beautiful city, and a lot of the destruction photos are from this place. It was a beautiful city, and I think people forget that. When we're talking about Syrian refugees, we're talking about middle-class people. We're talking about people who never expected this to happen. Yes, there was an authoritative regime, but no one ever expected this war to take hold. It was doing fairly well economically. Education-wise, they had 95 to 99% of their children were in school. This was an economic powerhouse. It was known as a breadbasket of the Middle East. It was doing very, very well economically. Yes, there was still many issues. Not to demean those issues, but it also, no one expected this to happen. Where in Lebanon, if Lebanon broke in civil war, the Lebanese joke about it, we're expecting it to happen any day now. And they expected that for the last 15 years. None of the Syrians expected this to happen, which I think psychosocially makes this conflict even harder to deal with for them.
Is that a fortress?
Yes, that's an old castle. I'm not sure exactly how old it is, but that's kind of the center of Aleppo, as my friends would tell me. So yeah, it's an old fortress. These cities, Damascus has claimed, though many cities claim this in the Middle East, that it's the oldest inhabited city forever. It's over 4,000 years old. There's tunnels underneath Aleppo, which people say are about 3,000 to 4,000 years old. These are really old cities, and it's really sad to see destruction going on. This is I'm pretty sure this is Aleppo or Damascus, but I show this picture just to demonstrate it was a thriving city. This is middle-class people we're talking about. And it's not a desert, which is, I think, great. This is in Lebanon. This is in the Kadisha Valley, which is called the Holy Valley. There's a lot of hermitages along here. And as you see, there's not many trees. There used to be a lot of trees, but King Solomon, wanting to build a temple and things like that, took a lot of the cedars. So a lot of the deforestation can be traced back to biblical times, which I thought was an interesting viewpoint. This is just the beauty within that and the lush greenness. This is in the northern part of Syria. As you see, it's very lush and green. So now I'm going to focus, this kind of background I think is important to understand about Syria. I'm going to get into our projects now and kind of how we worked around within the violence that were occurring. So MCC's kind of into Syria was always the Syrian Orthodox Church. There wasn't much of civil society within Lebanon, so a lot of the aid now needs to be funneled through church organizations or outside organizations, such as the Syrian project in which we implemented was helped by the Syrian Orthodox Church, was implemented by a Lebanese partner who had a Syrian who ran it, and I'll get into that later. But just the Syrian Orthodox Church we worked a lot with. This is their patriarch, or their pope, in other words. He actually passed away when we were there, and a new patriarch was installed. He had actually spent last couple of years in New Jersey, where there's a big Syrian Orthodox Church. But these actually are two implementing partners of CFGB, and they're a couple. I believe she works. I can picture the person, but I forgot what church she works with. But she actually incorporates a different CFGB project. But one I'm going to focus on is Reverend Riyad Jajur's project, which was through MCC. So he's a Syrian native actually, but spent most of his life in Lebanon and is with his partner. So he was the executive director of the Middle Eastern Council of Churches for 7 years. But then after he left that in early 2000s, he started his own NGO, which we ran our food project with. So this is and to demonstrate this is Andrew Longhiggins. He was through the United Church, and he was actually helping Reverend Riyad Jajur at his NGO, and actually did a lot of the work for the Syrian project. I was focusing more on the Lebanese. So this is just to show you what kind of occurs and how the project run. So in Syria, it had a food basket project. So basically what happened is monthly, there were 6,000 families that received a food basket from Riyad Jajur's NGO. And he also worked through a Muslim agency down there to help get more hands on the ground. So it was an interreligious delivery of aid. So these are the men who helped deliver the aid. So basically, in these food baskets, it should meet a family of 4, 60 to 70% of their need monthly if they used the rations to their greatest efficiency. So what was in the baskets was rice, burgio, macaroni, chickpeas, lentils, veggie oil, olive oil, sugar, salt, canned meat, tea, and tomato paste. As you see, they're the essentials. They're what would give them enough calories in order to get through their month. So this is so food. Basically, what happens was they had the supplies. They would drop off the supplies in a storeroom, and then the storeroom would sort them into the baskets and then hand them to the family. So you try within relief projects, you try to stay with the same families because that's seen as the most efficient. As you know, it's a lot easier to plan your life around if you know something's coming monthly. If you know a check's coming monthly, you can budget your time. I think it's similar with food. You can budget your food. You can understand, okay, I have this food coming monthly. And it helps to provide health and sustain the life of these families rather than just 6,000 families one-off. It doesn't actually provide most good to the people.
How did you select the 6,000?
So that was done through Reverend Rajajur and the youth on the ground who are implementing. So basically they would identify the people in most need, which would happen through both one-on-one interviews, which will happen through working with the Syrian Orthodox Church, for example, people on the ground identifying what family. And there was a criteria. I don't know it offhand. I would have to look at documentation, but it was like, do they have a man in the house? If they don't, most likely. If they have, if it's a bigger family, they're most likely to have it. If they don't have any income coming in, so there was a set of criteria in which they had to meet to qualify in order, and then it goes by most needs. So you meet the bottom need, choose the most need, and then you go from that. Does that make sense? Yeah. So yeah, and a lot of that takes a lot of trust building because we as an agency couldn't be on the ground in Syria. It's just too dangerous for us. So it takes a lot of agency. And a lot of trust within our partners. And I think CFGB does a great way at doing that, is building trust with partners, both through their church organizations, which makes up CFGB, but then our organization, such as building relationship with Reverend Yajajur over 15 years. So we trust. And that trust is the only way you can deliver effective aid. I've seen the UN get bogged down in bureaucracy, which I see the essential of it, but it slows down aid. But when you have trust within your partners, you can deliver aid effectively and efficiently. So just to show you kind of how this was delivered, this one was a more straightforward project than the Lebanese, which we'll get into, but basically it was providing aid as quick and efficiently as possible. And just to point out, it was 2008 when the policy changed, right? We buy all our food locally. Now we no longer, as you guys maybe would know, ship the wheat over to these places. We buy locally, support the local economy. The reality is, and what surprised me in a war zone, is the economy is still running. People are still trying to make money and put things together. Things are still being grown in areas that aren't affected by the war or have been affected by the war but stable right now. There is still economy, or there's still dealers who will buy from Turkey, Egypt, things like that. So the economy is still running and we want to support that. But it's also a tender process, so it's not like we're just pick one. We still had to go through, as CFGB always wants us to, which sometimes is infuriating but necessary, where you go through that, you get three people to bid on the project because we want to be most efficient with the aid and we want to hold to a standard. But when you're in the midst of a war zone, it gets frustrating sometimes, but it's also essential for best practice. So I'd like to tell a story because I believe, and kind of have you talking about peace education, I believe relief and peace correlate so much, and I'll kind of talk about this one story. I wish I had a better map. I couldn't find one, but there's two areas. So right along the Kalamun Valley, there's Sadat, Hafar, and Deret Teg. So these are three mostly Christian villages, but a lot of Muslims within the area. And the Muslims who were part of the project was about 80% Muslim, 20% Christian, which is actually to make up more or less of Syria, who were getting aid from us. They knew it was coming from a Christian organization. That was well known, and they were fine with that. And I'd like to tell you kind of how I think connecting and bringing aid, no matter what religion you are, brings about peacemaking. So this is Bishop Zawanis. He's part of the Syrian Orthodox Church. He's the bishop of that Kalamun region. So he tells us a story about within Sadat and Haftar, and what occurred when the Islamic extremists, this was right when I got there, so basically last October, right around this time, those villages got attacked by Islamist extremists. So not the moderate revolution, the revolution that had elements of extremism. So they came into these villages taking over. And what occurred, and these stories that I've heard, I wasn't there, so I can't authenticate that this is exactly what happened, but this is what we've been told to us, is that the Muslims of the village actually stood in front of churches, Syrian Orthodox churches, and said, if you want to desecrate this church, you have to kill us first. So this is elements of how I believe food, aid, and aid in general can also be peace building, an agent of peace building. And yes, there's still a lot of people who died because Rwanda has had to bury many people within the region.
Is it for me to say that the Muslims defended the Christian churches?
Yes.
Oh, good for that.
That is what happened, and like I said, every situation is different, but this is a story that we got told from our partners. So yeah, that's just a story I think that demonstrates the continued need of aid and how aid is not just stops at feeding people, but can be a bigger stroke of showing the humanity in all of this. So this is Lebanon. This is the project that I'm mostly dealt with and know more intimate details about. Kind of just to demonstrate the extent of the refugee crisis within Lebanon. This is a country that hasn't rebuilt from its own civil war, yet now it's dealing... This is a little dated, now it's about 1.3 million refugees. But you just see the extent. This is a very small country. It's a little less than 2 PEIs, if I remember my data right. I looked that up a while ago. But it is a very, very small country. I don't think we can really fathom. Like, I lived in Beirut. I could get to any place within 3 hours of this country, and that's with mountains. If it was all flat, hour and a half flat for sure.
So it's the size of southern Ontario. If you went, say, from
I would even say
to Windsor to
yeah, I would even say smaller than that, but has mountains. If that makes sense. So like we can get quicker places, probably less, maybe more surface area with the mountains, but less like saying it's very, very small. So this is demonstrating just kind of how some of the refugees lived. The reality is there's some rich refugees who are living in hotels, but there's also some middle class to lower class who end up taking over abandoned factories. So this is a whole village that actually moved and lived in this collective shelter. This is just to demonstrate they actually weren't. MCC did some other programming with them, but not CFGB programming. This is just to show you the informal settlements. There's about 1,100 of these informal settlements, probably a little more now, within the Bakal Valley, just to demonstrate what the extent of people were living in and the reality that they were living in. So I'm going to get into more of our project. So we implemented through a Palestinian organization. And what I find really unique about this is this Palestinian organization are made up of refugees from 1948. And these are second to third generation refugees. So Rasheed, who's a great friend of mine and implementing the CFGB project for MCC and doing a fantastic job, he has been to Palestine, but not legally. So he was actually second generation refugee within Lebanon. And the extent of Palestinians within Lebanon, they can't own property in Lebanon. They can't be doctors or lawyers unless it's through the UN. In Lebanon, the government doesn't allow them to do that. They can't vote. They don't have citizenship. These are people without citizenship, and they've been without citizenship since 1948. But what I found so powerful was these refugees were now helping other refugees that were coming in and living with them. Because this project was focused what they call within the Palestinian gatherings. For lack of a better term, and I don't like this terminology, but I will use it, is basically the slums of Lebanon. So there's the refugee camps that were set up in 1948 after the Nakba, or the Palestinians were left or pushed out of Israel-Palestine. And they ended up settling in what UN facilitated refugee camps. But now the community has grown. So outside of the refugee camps is called Palestinian gatherings. So they don't get all the benefits of being in the UN refugee camp. So this organization was created in the 90s to help the gatherings, which are the low economic places within Lebanon. And that's where our funding and CFGB project focused. This is Rita, who is the director of the organization, and these are some of the women who have been helped with our food voucher program, which I'll get into more. This is this is inside it. This is where the project, one of the areas which the project was serving. So within the tented communities, one of the only tented communities in which we served. We actually were able to move them out of these, or some of them out of the tented communities through different funding, but they still stayed on the food project because even though they got housing from a different organization, they still needed food. That problem was not solved. Just to show you how they were living. This was a baby. It was born, I think it was a couple weeks, a couple months. When this picture was taken, she brought a lot of joy to the family, but also a lot of newfound challenges with a new baby in the house. This is the day we started taking down some of the tents. Just to kind of show you where these people were living. And this is where they were moving into a kind of this building has existed, but it was renovated in order to allow people to live in. This is an area actually in Beirut. This is called the Gaza. It used to be a hospital, but now it's built. It was built basically low-income housing, and a lot of refugees now have moved into that building. And a lot of our Beirut project was in that building. And I actually got to tour around with one of the young women who were implementing the project, which is really, really amazing. So to kind of tell you how the project works. So at its peak, the project helped 13,490 persons. That fluctuates depending on funding, depending on price, and different variables. But it's right around that person's who would get funded. So how the project worked was if you're a family of 5, you'd get $20 per person in your family. So if you're a family of 5, you get a $100 voucher. How we used to do it, but as we kept innovating. So after 6 months, we evaluated what worked, what project, what didn't work. So at first we would give, if you have a family of 5, you'd give a $100 voucher. What we found, and some of the women were complaining, they're like, we don't like buying all our food all at once for the month. Can we have smaller, more vouchers, like same amount of money, but just more vouchers so we can spend at different times. So what we did was give them, if there's a family of 5, you'd get 5 $20 vouchers. We split it in 2. So there was always innovation trying to go in and trying to deliver the aid better. And usually the people with the best ideas were the women. The women who were buying the food and doing things. So this is a family that we met. This is in Sida. And yeah, they were shopping and they were lucky. We don't give out names just because around Syria there is a little tension surrounding that could this get back to them. Let's say the Assad regime would be into power after this, they would always not want their need to release. So out of their request, we don't give out names. And this is another woman, and then kind of back to the young man who implements the project. What was really unique about this project, and it was one of the first voucher programs, if not the first one. I like to claim it the first one. But one of the first voucher projects CFGB has ever implemented. And it was really unique to see how it worked, and both the positive things that come out of it, but also the struggles and the things you kind of have to tweak every now and then to make it implement better. Why we found it worked really well was it was very efficient in doing it, and it took a lot of the out of CFGB or out of MCC hands and let kind of the market decide and let other people do our work for us in a positive way. So where you do food baskets, you have to organize all the delivery of that. But within this, we can use pre-existing grocery stores in order, so a pre-existing market that works, and use our buying capital and incorporate it within the already existing market. So that has a lot of inefficiency, so we don't have to spend money on gas, because like within the other project within Syria, there was some of the CFGB monies had to go to gas because we needed to deliver the food. Here, we didn't need to because we just, the grocery store could bring out all the food that they needed. So how it worked was that there's 3 different cities that we worked in, Beirut, Sida, and Tyre. And there's 3 different grocery stores in each city. And basically, so if you were from that city, you were registered in that city, and then you'd go to this grocery store. And all the grocery stores were close to the communities we were working in, so they could walk. That was one of the issues that people brought up. So they could walk. So what we did is, but we used our buying power in order to negotiate with grocery stores and make sure that they met our expectations. So one of the big issues surrounding food vouchers is we don't control what they buy with that. So basically, we need to make sure that they were just buying food, because if the Canadian government looks over our data and says, CFGB, what are you doing? They're not buying food with this money, that puts CFGB's funding at risk. So what we did was talk with the grocery stores. We're like, okay, we're investing. In some of the grocery stores, we were investing $500,000 to $600,000. We're like, you want this, and at that point, we kind of knew that most likely we'd get another project or a potential of another project next 6 months. We're like, if you wanted to keep this funding and keep this project in your grocery store, which makes you money, you have to make sure that they're just buying food. So they would tell all their tills, who is the thing, that they would not let anyone buy anything that was non-food items. And because these communities are very small, and as you guys, many of you are from small communities, everyone knows what's going on. So if someone's abusing the system, someone else is going to know, and they're going to tell party, and then we're going to have to deal with it. So in the reality, it's kind of self-checking in a lot of ways. But another issue you come up with, food baskets, we could just give them the staples. What happens if the family buys things that we don't consider staple foods? Now, PART does a really good job, our implementing partner, with educating on the need for healthy eating. But the women found, and the women really appreciated our food voucher program because it gave them autonomy. It made them, because there's many mothers and fathers in here, we all eat differently. Every family here eats differently. And having that autonomy for the women of who come from middle class backgrounds, who are educated people, able to make conscious choices for themselves and for their family and knowing their family's needs. And I found that really powerful, and that gave the women, it wasn't just physical health that they were giving them, it was psychosocial health, because it gave them autonomy to make choices for themselves, which for a human being, that is huge, because a lot of their autonomy has been taken away from them. But then another issue comes up is like, what if they start buying like sweets and things like that? And we found I think it's actually a little high because we counted two things I don't think we should have, which is Hellway and honey. But we found around a little less than 10% were bought on what we demonstrated as non-essential foods. And we brought this up in focus groups with the women. We're like, well, like what happens with like 10%? Like, is this too much? They talked about the power it was for them to be able to buy suckers and things like that for their children, to reward them. Children did well in school. I want to reward them for that. And that really struck me. With on paper, you look at this 10% and you get really like, are you sure? What are you doing? But then you talk with the women and they explain their reasoning for why some non-essential food is actually really important to their family. It makes a lot more sense. And that to me was really powerful to remember that people are people. And yes, you want to keep them alive, but you also want to give them a reason to live. And I think that's really important. So I'd like to kind of point out Rasheed and Ahlan, right next to Rasheed there. They're the two people I work closely with. She was his assistant, and I say she did all the hard work. He didn't like paperwork, so he just gave it to Ahlan. And then the rest are they would be paid a stipend. So technically, they were slightly paid by CFGB. But they basically were social workers. They were the logistics of this project. And to me, when you look at these faces of these young people, they're the hands and feet of the aid you give. You guys work very hard in your fields to do this. These guys worked so hard to make the money that you fundraise put into action to help people. And yeah, I just ask you to look at these people. These are the young people who make CFGB live, really, as an organization. And thank you so much. And they will all say thank you. Thank you for donating the money you do. It does a lot of work. It empowers a lot of people, and it keeps people alive, which is really powerful. So thank you. And if you have any questions, please ask me.